Thank you for joining us on this Thursday. And I just want to help you be reminded today God is a miracle working God. We have explained away what God can do. Now, every believer down in their hearts knows because of the Word of God that God can do anything. And yet, somehow in our day, we have just felt like God does very little. But God still will work. And the greatest work, of course, is salvation and the transformation of people. But God answers prayer. It's just wonderful to band together and for the Spirit of God to lead Christians and to see God work. You have one incident in the life of the Apostle Paul. You're now talking about a period of time after Pentecost, and yet God was still working. And he was preaching in Troas. He was there for 5 days as he was traveling, and actually he was there for 7 days. And as they were preaching there, they were in an upper chamber, and the preaching went long. I think most of you know the story. Verse 9 of chapter 20 of Acts, and there sat in the window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was along preaching, all of us preachers take comfort in that, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. In other words, he died. That's a tragic thing. Whenever you are around an accident in which somebody actually dies, that is a stunning situation. I've not had that happen. I've been on the scene right after. I didn't see. A year ago, we had a terrible tragedy at our church when that vehicle came from the grocery store and went plowed right through our crowd, and one of our dear staff members was killed. I came on the scene as I turned around, and that had an enormous impact on me. But those that saw it, it's still very difficult for them to get that out of their minds. So there's something about an accident and then someone dying because of it. And so the entire crowd was just really struggling. And we read in verse 10, and Paul went down and fell on him, and embracing him said, "Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him." When he therefore was come up again, in other words, God did a miracle, and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even till break of day. So he departed, and they brought the young man alive, and were not a little comforted. In other words, they were really, really, really comforted. And I use this rather dramatic illustration here from the Word of God as an example of the great comfort that comes when God answers prayer from just the daily bread. God's promised that to us. That's what we're to pray for. Praying for God to meet our needs, financially for wisdom. God will always work. To pray for a situation that you need an answer from God concerning that situation. Maybe it's a matter of healing. It's a matter of seeing a person helped when they are in distress, whatever it is. When you pray and believe God, and God gives freedom to pray for that need to be met, and then it is met, there is great comfort. I remember as a young man, early in the ministry, things were already changing in fundamentalism and in our culture. And I'd only been for a few years in the ministry, and all of a sudden my son was diagnosed with a massive brain tumor. And then I was told after several surgeries there was no hope. No one had ever lived with his type of cancer. And I remember all the work that God did in my heart, how I had to release that and trust the Lord, and what that did for my wife and I. And there's so many things. But then when God chose to give confidence to the leadership of the church there in Chicago and into our hearts that God was actually going to heal him, he didn't have to do that. God allows things like that to end up with death, and we certainly had submitted to that. But when we came to faith as God worked in our hearts and believed God, and then my son was actually healed, which is still a modern day miracle, I was more than a little comforted. Not just in gaining my son. That was certainly the immediate blessing. But far greater than that was my faith was undergirded. And I remember as I was struggling with some of the things that I was seeing and hearing, God used this to go deep within my heart. I'm on the throne. You can take the Bible literally. I want to do a great work today. Trust me. Do not at all move back from anything in the Word of God, and don't be troubled by anything that you're seeing. You can trust me. And honestly, I look back at that. That was a key moment for me. That being comforted in the midst of trial about my faith was very important. And so it is right for us folks to ask God to work, meet our needs financially, and the little things of life. Trust Him. In fact, He'll do little miracles all the time if we'll trust Him. And I promise you, in the midst of everything else, you will find great comfort and encouragement for your faith.